Warning, we are not your attorneys. Please, don't take anything we say as legal advice. I'm Geoff.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Derrick.
And you are listening to the Not So Grand Jury,
which is now sponsored by Morwa P. LLC.
Hey guys, so this week we're recording about Daredevil Season 1. This was released in 2015. It's currently streaming on Disney+. And just a rough outline. Season 1 of Daredevil follows Matt Murdock, a blind lawyer who uses his heightened senses to help fight crime as a masked vigilante in Hell's Kitchen. By day, he works at a law firm, Nelson and Murdock, with his best friend Foggy Nelson. And by night, he fights crime throughout New York and just in Hell's Kitchen, really. By night, Matt dons a black mask and takes on the city's criminal underworld. This is mostly, through the season, most of the crime he interacts with is the result of the antagonist Wilson Fisk, played by Vincent how do you say that name? Vincent D'Onofrio?
You got it.
Yep, there we go. Ruthless businessman who operates in the shadows. Matt investigates Fisk's operation. He allies himself with journalist Ben Ehrlich. We don't need to mention all that. There's a bunch of prominent guest stars that he runs into. Yeah. Matt investigates Fisk's operations. I don't know. I don't think we have to go into all these side characters. They're not like side characters, but they're.
I mean, Karen's important.
Okay.
I mean, my entire part is about Karen, Mike. So,
okay.
Do
we talk about Ben Ehrlich at all? Like, he's a cool character, but do we talk about him during the plot, really?
Not really.
No, not really.
Matt investigates Fisk's operations. Throughout the adventures, we meet some other important side characters, including Karen Page, who uncovers crucial evidence linking Fisk to corruption, while Foggy discovers Matt's secret identify. I'm going to leave that part. Karen, who uncovers crucial evidence linking Fisk to corruption. And in the final episode, Matt finally defeats Wilson Fisk, leading to his imprisonment, although he does later pop up in future seasons. So we're going to touch on three main issues. It's going to be Karen's charges relating to her work with her prior job at Union Allied before she joins Nelson and Murdock. The criminal case involving one of Wilson Fisk's underlings. I don't know the character's name, actually. Bowling alley guy?
Bowling alley guy.
I'm just calling him bowling alley guy. I'm sure they said his name. I didn't care.
And then finally, some landlord-tenant issues that underlie a lot of what Fisk is trying to accomplish throughout the show. So I guess, Derrick, do you want to start us off? Are you doing the Karen Page charges?
I am, so I'll happily jump into that. So, I am spiking. Let's try to prevent that from happening. How about now? There we go. All right, so a little background on Karen Page. So she actually is introduced very early on. I think like we basically learn about her, and she becomes very active in very early episode 1. But basically, we find out in episode 1 that Karen essentially wakes up next to what we find out is a murdered coworker who she works as a secretary at Union Allied Construction, and the coworker was in the legal department, and she's literally holding the murder weapon, which is a knife that's basically caked in blood, and the police sort of immediately knock down her place and put her under arrest. Foggy finds out about her situation from Officer Mahoney, who all we know at the time is that he's bribed the cop with cigars for that guy's mom. We found out later he might be the one good cop in New York City who isn't bought by Wilson Fisk, but at the time we don't have much information other than they know of each other. They sort of don't even really like each other, but he bought cigars for Officer Mahoney's mom, which is completely normal.
And weirdly, he can be bought, it seems.
Especially when the first thing we learn about him is when Foggy says, "I gotta go bribe a cop."
That's a horrible thing to say, Foggy.
I know. In this day and age.
All right, shake it. I gotta go grab a cop.
Ugh, Foggy.
Kidding. NSA, if you're listening. But seriously, yeah. I gotta go grab a cop.
Officer of the law. Defense attorney. We're supposed to be enemies.
First off, we've been enemies since we were 4, Brett, so let's not blame it on career choices. Secondly, I'm not a particularly good defense attorney, so helping me is like helping yourself. And finally, these are for Bess.
Please stop giving my mom cigars, Foggy.
What? She'll outlive us all. Look, I'm not asking you to do anything immoral. Just give me a heads up if something, interesting walks through the door.
You're right. It ain't the careers.
Thanks, buddy.
So it's a great start, which is very interesting. As you don't even have a law firm yet, and you're already bribing cops. That's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah, he built that relationship early,
real early, real quick. So he finds out about her situation from Officer Mahoney because he says it's an interesting situation. Is that really interesting? Someone murdering someone else in Hell's Kitchen? Like, for me, that doesn't seem interesting, but what do I know? Matt and Foggy sort of show up, end the interrogation with the cops. So actually there wasn't an interrogation, but they, kick the cops out and have a kind of hilarious conversation that will certainly drop in here when they basically say we've been practicing for 7 hours because they got desks earlier that day, which is kind of fantastic.
We understand you're in some trouble. We may be able to help.
Can you tell us what happened? Why don't we start with what we know then? You were found in your apartment with one Daniel Fisher.
Who appears to be the victim of a homicide, and currently you're the only suspect, Miss Page.
Who the hell are you guys?
I'm Matt. He's Foggy.
Who sent you?
No one says.
So what? You're just a couple of good Samaritans? Today's just my lucky day?
I bribed the desk sergeant with a box of cigars for his mom.
Our practice is relatively young, Miss Page, and we are aggressively pursuing new clientele. You gotta stop giving Bess cigars.
She likes to smoke, man. It's a free country.
So how long have you been practicing law?
What time is it?
It's 12:22 a.m.
About 7 hours.
Well, if you go from when we passed the
I
bar.
was going from we got our own desks.
Oh, then yeah. 7 hours.
You've never done this before?
If you were to hire us, then yes, you would be our first client.
Technically, yeah.
Well, I don't have any money.
Well, it was lovely to meet you, Miss Page.
You don't have any money and we don't have any clients. Maybe we can help each other.
So they have a conversation with her, and apparently she does accept them as their lawyers, even though she has nothing to pay, but that's okay. They don't have clients, she doesn't have money. So it's a perfect fit. And we then see that it appears to be either a cop or a jail guard that's trying to kill her in her holding cell. Although he's not happy about it. He keeps saying, I'm sorry, so we know he's sort of being forced to do it. But he doesn't do a great job. She fights back, screams very loudly, and stops the assault. We assume that another cop or someone else came in and stopped it. And the next thing is that we see Foggy and Matt having conversations with the same two detectives as the day before. They say that they should have charged her 4 hours ago, that she should be released, in addition to just claiming that she could sue everybody and so on and so forth. And she is released, and then there's sort of continuation from there where they talk about the backstory. What we learn later, we don't know at the time, what we learn later is that basically Karen has some damning evidence about Union Allied's money laundering schemes. And because apparently, Union Allied is important enough to Wilson Fisk that he wants to make sure that stuff gets buried. And the short version is they want her killed. They do not succeed. And she apparently, prior to her, getting in this situation, she wanted to have drinks with a coworker in the legal department, thinking that he was a person she could trust. Well, there we are. A couple things about this. First, not terribly far off from how it would be in real life. I also think of this in like how far off it would be if you had two brand new lawyers straight out of law school. How would they handle the situation?
Sure.
Honestly, not terrible, I would say. Like, and I say not terrible, it's terrible in certain senses, but that's what a brand new law student would do. Like, they're not doing a good job selling themselves. They're not doing a good job of like sort of, protecting her in any way. It's they show up and they're just basically happy to have a client. Although Foggy was going to leave when she said she had no money, but which is kind of great. The whole I don't have any money, and she goes, "Well, it's great to meet you, Miss Page." And then Matt has to be like, "It's okay. We don't have clients. You don't have money. This will all work out." And by the way,
I mean, that makes no sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no,
I mean, I guess they could use a legal assistant to deal with their no clients.
Well,
but
and let's be honest, it's not the first time in the Not So Grand Jury that we talked about a show where one of the clients becomes an employee of that attorney very quickly thereafter.
It is a weirdly common trope of these shows, right? Where they're like, they introduce a character. I guess especially if it's a running TV show, it's like we're introducing a character, episode 1 or 2. We want them to stick around, so we're going to spend some time on them, and they randomly get hired by the firm, even though like they're working for free or they're paying off their legal debt or whatever.
Yeah, which is questionable.
It's questionable.
Speaking,
a lot of issues. It's also just a weird trope that these shows kind of keep doing.
Yeah, and I mean, in both instances, I think we can assume that at a certain point they are transitioned to being a paid employee, but you kind of just have to go with it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you can't have indentured servants.
Well,
that's just generally not a thing. And then
correct. Well, and let's be honest. To go back to what with Mickey Holler with her with his driver, like he had an actual legal practice eventually. Like I know he had come out of like, he had been a few years off, but like he immediately gets clients that pay him. Like he gets Trevor Elliott, who apparently gave him basically a boatload of money. I could see how he could afford to have employee or employees. There is nothing during season 1 that indicates they've make money.
Well, there is. I'll get to that.
Okay. Well, certainly not early.
No, not until episode 3.
Right. In fact, I am a little curious as to, even with the money they do get, how they afford what they have. But nevertheless, we'll get that. That sounds like something you can handle, Geoff.
Sure.
But anyway, that's so in terms of like sort of legal accuracies, they do handle that part pretty well. Like, it seems like it was be realistic that 2 young attorneys would try to figure out what they're doing. The one thing they do talk about a lot is they mention multiple times that the New York cops have the prosecution has 24 hours to charge her.
We end up at manslaughter, we get the right judge, maybe she's out in 5 to 10.
We're not taking a deal.
No, this is why they have deals, Matt, so the straightforward cases don't waste everybody's time.
I don't think she did it.
She's the sole suspect, found at the scene, covered in blood, with the murder weapon and no defensive wounds. If they offer anything, it'll be a gift. And we will take that gift. We do not want this to go to trial.
They don't want this to go to trial either. Why hasn't she been charged yet?
They have 24 hours, and it's the weekend. They're gonna take every last second to collect the evidence before they move.
They've got the evidence. You just laid it out yourself. This is a good arrest, Foggy. We should already be reading about it in the papers. There's something not right about this case. I can feel it. We're gonna make this easy, detectives. Get the ADA in here to release Miss Page, and we'll recommend to our charming, media-friendly client that she not plaster the airwaves with how she was nearly killed in your custody.
And I'll agree not to make cooing noises for the rest of this meeting when I think of the civil suit that we have in our hands.
How do you know they're not charging her?
Besides the fact that you were required to do so 4 hours ago. If you were gonna do it at all.
That's an excellent question. Along with how the security cameras on Miss Page's detention area went on the fritz right before the assault.
Yeah, we'd like to speak to Mr. Farnham about that, as well as what...
Get in line. You'll be arraigned in the morning.
Get my client released. Don't make me ask again.
That is generally true. After you're arrested in New York City, you're fingerprinted and then typically sent to central booking to await arraignment. Arraignment's the first appearance, for those who aren't aware of how the criminal process works. Arraignment is the first appearance in court before a judge. This is when you are formally read the charges against you. You typically say, I'm not guilty. But, that's when you first sort of, if you don't have a lawyer, that's when you get your lawyer. The judge will determine how much bail is set. If you're unable to post bail, you will remain incarcerated. In New York City, in New York state law, this has to happen within 24 hours. I will say it doesn't always happen within 24 hours, but for instance, New York City, they have night courts, weekend courts. They very typically are able to get this within 24 hours. And by the way, it's not like if it doesn't happen within 24 hours, the charges are immediately dropped. It's not like once that ends, you can't keep going. It's just try to arraign people as quick as humanly possible. So they are correct.
Yeah, and you can't
go for it, Geoff.
You can't hold someone indefinitely.
Correct. And I think that's actually the rule. Is like you can only hold them for 24 hours without talking to a lawyer of any capacity. But like here, it is a little. I would be very curious. So like when the first time they talk to her, it's 12:20 something a.m. as I recall correctly.
Oh, okay.
Then a full day goes by, and then or either that night that she's attacked. Let's just say the hours don't add up. It doesn't add up that she would have been arrested, and then when they go see her again, they say they basically say, I think it's Matt that says you had to charge her 4 hours ago.
Right.
That's not technically correct. Like
it would have had to have been more time than that.
Correct. It doesn't seem like the time adds up. But regardless, they are generally correct. They have 24 hours. But it's more like 24 hours to hold her before they make a decision is the sort of more accurate statement. And so anyway, but that's one thing. The other thing they bring up a bunch is Brady material. So they keep saying like this doesn't add up. In any other scenario, they would have charged her immediately. It would be in the papers, blah, blah, blah. That's honestly probably true. Like if there was a murder of that nature, it'd be very unlikely in a normal situation that they wouldn't have charged her that next morning. She would have been the first perp walk into Manhattan court.
Right.
So they're correct on that. The one thing I don't think they're entirely correct on is they keep talking about Brady material, but they say Brady material in sort of a broader sense of just discovery. Like Brady material is, in for those of you who are not familiar with Brady material, it means you probably haven't listened to most of our podcasts because we've talked about it on a lot of our episodes. But Brady material stems from a Supreme Court case called Brady, where the rule is that there is a constitutional duty of the prosecution in a criminal case to disclose material evidence favorable to the accused, regardless of whether the defense requests it or not. So Brady material is actually material that's bad for the prosecution. It's not generic discovery. So when they kept saying Brady material, what I think they meant was discovery, like in some way. But also, you don't get Brady material before an arraignment. You don't even get Brady material in the days after the arraignment, typically. Like, you get that during, like, the true discovery time where you get that information. You're not going to get it that quickly. So that's, like, one thing that they were a little off on is, like, the timing of it is, like, and listen, they're young law students. Maybe they have no idea. Because, by the way, if I was a brand new out of law school law student about to jump into a criminal practice, I wouldn't have a fucking clue either. So, this totally tracks in the sense that this is some sort of wrong, but I could see the law students, or I say law students, they're lawyers, but they're effectively law students. I could see them getting it wrong. So it's correct and incorrect, correctly incorrect.
And since she hasn't been arraigned, they haven't appeared in court as her attorneys yet.
Correct.
So the prosecution doesn't even necessarily know that who they would hand material over to for discovery or Brady material specifically.
Correct. Correct.
I mean, they might have heard from the police, well, these people showed up saying they were her attorneys.
Right. But, like, you don't walk into an arraignment and then have the other side be like, here's all the Brady material. Like, that's not how that works. I will say it was kind of funny when they when the guys come in and introduce as her lawyers, and they're like, do you recognize these gentlemen? And Matt goes, yeah, we're her lawyers. Now get out.
Okay, can we please take the handcuffs off the 110-pound woman?
Miss Page, can you tell me who these men are?
We're her lawyers. Uncuff our client and give us the room, please. My name is Matt Murdock. This is my associate, Foggy Nelson. Do you mind if we sit down?
She gave a vague shrug. I say we go with it.
I'm actually curious how often that happens in real life because, like, a lot of times a lawyer will walk in and I'm sure like a defendant or like someone who just possibly committed a crime has no idea that a lawyer's been called on their behalf. So like that has to happen all the time, right? Where someone walks in and be like, "I'm your lawyer," and they just have to be like, "Yep, you're my lawyer."
So I have been in a situation sort of like that.
Okay.
And I'm going to avoid disclosing any confidential information here, but I did not introduce myself to them as their attorney. This was, I really don't want to give anything away that would identify who the person is. But essentially I had a sit down meeting with someone who I had heard through a client was in a similar situation. And so when I met them, I sat down and said, "Hi, I'm Geoff Blackwell. Have you been told who I am?"
Right.
And they were like, "No."
You were trying not to.
I proceeded.
You were trying not to say, "I might or may not represent you," but you have to wait for him to sort of identify what's going on.
Well, I just wanted to know if they had, how much did they know about the situation yet before I say, "I am your attorney," because that is not generally how those conversations start. It's, "I am willing to represent you if this situation is what you find yourself in."
Right.
Say the word and I will,
Fair enough. Yeah, and actually you want to know what? A probably seasoned defense lawyer would be able to handle that correctly, right? So they would walk in, they would tell the cops, "I'm an attorney, get out." They wouldn't say, "I'm their attorney" or "I am that person's attorney." They would say, "I'm an attorney, get out," get the detectives out, and then sit down and go, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. If you would have me, I will represent you. Here are my terms," and have them sign the engagement letter at the moment. That's probably how it would work, right? That's my guess.
I don't know that I have them sign an engagement letter right then. It'd be like, "Hey, if it's something where it's, paid work, we're having an initial consultation.
Right.
And, if you decide to proceed, you can review this contract and sign at your leisure," or something like that.
Fair enough. That makes sense. But for the most part, I'll say like I think it's handled pretty well. I think it's, semi-legally accurate. I would be curious. There's a couple things that are a little confusing. Like she's never really seems to be sent to central booking, which is how it would work in New York City. But then again, this isn't a normal thing. Like they want her dead, so they wouldn't put her in central booking because she'd be surrounded by humans. So,
right. And we should say, for the purposes of this discussion, the two officers that they're speaking to are bought by Wilson Fisk.
Right. Mm-hmm. Which we obviously don't know at the time, but we find out sort of as we go along. It turns out that everyone we talk to for the first few seasons is bought and paid for, with the exception of Officer Mahoney, apparently.
It's a handful. It's a shocking minority of really all the characters who are not being paid by Wilson Fisk.
Right. And again, we don't find that out until a little long down the road. And it does, it all tracks once you get there. But at first you're just like, this doesn't seem right. There's just something wrong here. But so, yeah, honestly, for the most part, it did a pretty good job with her charges. And, and then of course, as one does, she then goes to work for them as their office manager / secretary.
Right.
As one does.
Sure.
So I know it's not much in the way of repayment, but it is my grandmother's recipe, and she made me promise only to serve it to my future husband. It's like filled with virtue or something.
I thought I detected a whiff of virtue in there.
Not that I'm complaining, but you really should be thanking the nut in the mask.
He's not a nut. I mean, he's a little weird, maybe.
We're just glad you're okay.
Here.
Well, if it weren't for you two, I'd still be in that cell.
The job's easy when your client's innocent. All you did was tell the truth.
Yeah, but you listened.
Oh, and don't get us wrong. we're still gonna bill you. Just as soon as we figure out how to make bills.
I did notice that you could use some help around here, and I owe you. Maybe I could clean the place up a bit.
Is this place messy?
Our firm is very prestigious and discerning, Miss Page. Do you have any prior experience hiding electrical cords up in ceiling tiles?
No, but I'll work for free.
Yeah, you're hired.
You just got hired.
And so we were all once baby attorneys, but Derrick, I think you were the only one among us who you didn't go directly into starting your own practice, but you did break off from your old job and start a new practice. I imagine there had to be some trepidation of like, I'm bringing a couple clients with me, but after that, who knows?
The first year is, I mean, I'd say year. I've had my practice now for almost 6 years. And I would say I was never comfortable with the number of clients I had until probably 3 years in. And for those first few years, like, you say yes a lot until proven otherwise. I am now 6 years in and I say no a lot until proven otherwise. Like, I mean, that's when you know you're in a good state, when I'm not desperate to find my next case or my next client, which I know I'm in a good position to be able to do that. When you're first in, if someone's got a client, you find a way to say yes. And
they're paying.
And they're sometimes not even. Like, sometimes it's like you just want clients beget clients. So it's like,
okay, that's fair.
So if you can get someone in the door, more is going to come along. In fact, I actually had a couple cases, or I'm not even going to say cases, a couple clients early on where, a friend of mine said like, hey, can you handle this thing for my company? And I took, they were like, it's a small little issue. Can you just handle it quickly? So I didn't charge them all that much because it was a very small issue and whatever, but that led to more. That led to the next one, or it led to me becoming more of their go-to day-to-day lawyer because I took that first case, did it, I'm not even going to say on the cheap, but efficiently. And so it always leads to more. But the one thing with your first few years is you say yes a lot, even when there's a red flag, because you just need money to come in the door. And there are certainly a couple cases I said yes to that either, I'm not even going to say they were bad cases. They weren't necessarily bad cases. They were ones I wouldn't say yes to now because of the type of law or the amount of time and effort I knew I was going to have to put in to get myself caught up, or sometimes they were just cases that are just not things I enjoyed doing. But you do it. You do it to start the process. And honestly, like what they're doing, which is like what Matt said, which is like when she's like, I don't have money, and Foggy's like, peace out, off you go. And Matt's like, no, sit back down. Like, you got to learn somewhere.
It is such a weird scene of ambulance chasing, but also like just going after somebody because they're accused of murder to get them as a client is such a weird way to jump in.
I mean, listen, I can only imagine what a brand new criminal attorney would do in order to sort of get their first cases. And honestly, you want to know what they're probably doing is they're probably, they know a clerk, they know a judge, they get a lot of court-appointed stuff.
Well, that's the bribing of the police officer, in air quotes, because I'm not even sure they are certainly giving him cigars to pass along to his mom, but in return for him letting them know that there's like someone who needs an attorney.
Right.
Which
isn't a bribe.
I'd have to look at the statute. I don't know if that would qualify as like his official business, or
he later gives.
I don't know.
He later he pops up later in this show and gives like more information.
Okay.
Yeah. At least in the first season, like he comes up. Was it like episode 12 or something, and like he's giving more information that like he probably should not be giving.
Gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, that first scene is like, did you really have to bribe him for that? Could you have just gotten that from like?
Yeah, I mean, let's just say, in general, don't give cops something expecting something in return.
Yeah,
that's not a good call.
Or any public official.
Or any public, yes.
Right.
Also, it's just a weird way of like, not ambulance chasing, but almost ambulance chasing, where you're just like, is this really the case that you want to take? Like,
it would be very much jumping into the deep end.
Also,
Yeah.
it is like it's the first demonstration of Charlie Cox's ability to, Matt Murdock's ability to be a lie detector test, a human lie detector test, and like seeing that she's telling the truth. So I guess it's the opportunity for the show to show off his powers.
But there are certainly like easier ways if this was a, completely in real life scenario where they would get, they would start with a bunch of misdemeanors, right? Like they would take small misdemeanor crimes. Honestly, you could I realize this is 2015, but honestly, still in 2015, there were probably a significant amount of like ways that they could do it. Like nowadays, even like 10 years later, like there are ways where like you can work with an online company who like takes in clients and then they pass them off to different lawyers. But there would have been easier ways for them to get their first client other than quote unquote bribing a cop.
How would they have known? How would they have known that she hadn't requested a public defender at that point?
I assume through the Officer Mahoney.
I mean, we don't know how much time had passed. I don't know. It could have been like very quick.
Yeah, I just have to presume because we're not told.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong. If she did get a public defender, it would have been at the arraignment or right before the arraignment, right?
I have no idea. I can't comment on that. I don't know how it would work in New York.
That's typically how it works. Is you get to central booking, and then at central booking, you get first interviewed by your public defender, and then they're the one standing next to you at the arraignment. So again, the fact that she never got sent to central booking means that there was never time to get a public defender.
Okay.
Right. The judge never asked, do you have an attorney or something?
Right. Right. Yeah. But yeah, so honestly, they do a pretty decent job. And I think, listen, we could spend a very significant period of time, which we're not going to, on Nelson and Murdoch and their ability to function as a law firm. Although I think Geoff's going to get a little bit into that in some ways. So.
Hi everyone, Derrick here with a brief message. The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by my law firm, Morwa P. LLC. One of Morwa PLC's many practice areas is business law. If you are a business owner or someone who is thinking of starting up a new or side business, you need a legal team who can efficiently provide you legal counsel, keeping you and your business away from potential legal issues, and if necessary, representing you in any disputes that do arise. We pride ourselves on being cost efficient while also getting to know our clients. If you want less stress and more support, you need Morwa. If you would like to set up a free consult, please click on the link in the show notes, visit our website, www.mooreatty.com, that's mooreatty.com, or email us at contact@mooreatty.com. And now, back to the show.
To your earlier point, Derrick, of, early on you take all the clients you can get. My topic of discussion, which is their representation of a guy who beat a dude to death in a bowling alley with a bowling ball, is sort of in direct conflict with what you just said and with what Matt Murdock said earlier in the episode, because Wesley, Wilson Fisk's kind of creepy right-hand man.
Right-hand man, yeah.
Shows up and is like, hey, we want to put you on retainer. Consolidated Global wants to put you on retainer for whatever. Is that cool? You guys down with that?
Then forgive me for being blunt.
Blunt is a strong word.
In my line of work, I find it refreshing.
What is that line of work, exactly?
What my partner is trying to say is we're still building a practice, so we're very particular about our clientele.
I assure you, all my employer wants is for you to continue to be ethical, decent men. Good lawyers. And for that, for nothing more than your exceptional skills and your discretion. You'll be fairly compensated.
Uh-huh. It's fair. That's fair.
Your partner doesn't seem convinced.
Like Foggy said, we're particular about our clientele.
I
No.
didn't think that's how that worked.
Later,
No.
when you have somebody paying the mortgage, when you have somebody paying the bills, then you can be selective.
Well, in fact, I'll be honest. The first, for my first 6 months to year of my firm, I came very close once to almost signing on to a scam because I'm like, it's money. Like, like you're almost worried. Like, and honestly, it was a good thing because I did at some point realize, oh, this is not a real thing because it almost seemed too good to be true. But when you're early on, anything is too good to be true because and so so Matt's statement that we can be selective with our clients is complete and utter BS.
Right. And something you said, Derrick, rung a bell for me. I will occasionally get emails from companies that seem to, at least they appear to try to make their business by underwriting litigation and then taking a cut at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And those have always struck me as super scammy. And also, they clearly don't do their homework because we do all our work pro bono.
Right.
And
oh, that'd be fun.
And it's not cases where there's large sums of money at stake.
Right.
Those have always struck me as super sketchy.
There are legitimate litigation funders out there, but there tend to be not ones that email you, email you.
That cold email.
Yeah.
So taking a step back on the plot, it's such a weird, overarching conspiracy, and I kind of hate when shows do this, where it's, we have so much money and we're bribing absolutely everybody, including this random 2-person law firm that started 30 seconds ago.
Mm-hmm. Because they're clean, they don't have a bad history that tarnishes them in some way.
Like, does this imply that they've bought out every attorney? Also, the show does a weird thing where the world does not exist outside of Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen is an empire unto itself, and it's really it's a little neighborhood in New York.
Well, and also, if you're in Hell's Kitchen, you don't actually do work outside of Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, no one would ever go 3 blocks to the rest of Manhattan and
Right. So Wesley has offers them a retainer of some undisclosed sum, but with, per Foggy's statement, several zeros. He comments that had Matt seen the number of zeros on the retainer check, he would not be so skeptical.
What is your problem?
He wouldn't even give us his name, Foggy.
You wouldn't care if you could see the zeros on this check.
Yeah, maybe you would if you couldn't.
We're running out of time.
I'll meet you there.
Meet me? Where the hell are you going?
I have never been in a position where someone just retains my services for an indefinite period, for no particular matter. There are attorneys who do that kind of thing. Like Michael Cohen immediately leaps to mind, who's just a guy's attorney for whatever a guy might need.
And I'll actually tell you, Geoff, I have a couple of those clients. So I have a couple clients where I just have a retainer.
Okay.
Until they need me. It's not that big. There's not that many. There's not that many zeros on the end of it. But that is something that tends to happen when they just say
they want to be able to email you a question without having to find an attorney for it.
Correct.
I'm not saying those don't happen. I've just never been in.
Understood
that scenario.
But it's funny because everyone thinks that for you to have for some reason, the concept of having a retainer is a trope in the TV and movie world, that if you're retained, if you have a retainer, then you are retained. You can be just retained without you can be engaged without a retainer.
Right.
But having the retainer makes it seem more legitimate. Again, it's just a small little trope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine having the retainer, there's not a question of whether you're going to get paid on
that's why that's why you do it, right? So that's what I do for most new clients. Most new clients have to give me some version of a retainer, but it's mostly for me to just be like, okay, I know some money's coming in.
Yeah. But that is what makes me think at that point they have taken this retainer from Confederated Global for some amount, and when you have received payment for attorney's work, whether it's as a retainer or a flat fee or something. Well, not so much a flat fee, but money you receive from a client goes into a special kind of account, and you can't access that money until you've actually done the work to earn the money, even though it's there and set aside for you to use. So they've received some money here, and presumably them working on this bowling alley case, and Karen is obviously helping them with that, paying for, say, their internet in their office, which is super on the fritz, much like Mike's.
Mr. Murdoch, perhaps you should review one of our cases before you make a decision? Peace of mind and whatnot.
That's a fantastic idea. Matthew?
Yeah. What harm could it do?
Excellent. You have 38 minutes to get to precinct 15.
What? Now? What's the case?
Everything you need is in this file. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you.
Well, but they're retained and they don't yet know why. And they then are told, after they take the check, that they have 37 minutes to get to the particular precinct where Bowling Alley Guy is being held. Which is a weird thing for your new client to do to you, but
that might be a way for you to very quickly fire your new client and just not build. That's
true.
Like, we'll return the retainer. This is an impossible thing.
They haven't done a conflicts check. They don't know who this guy is.
Yeah.
Of course, they're brand new, so their one conflicts check would be, hey, Karen, have you heard of this guy? Or Confederated Global? No? Okay. But so they go and meet with Bowling Alley Guy. Now, Bowling Alley Guy is what the episode opens on. This is episode 3 of season 1, Rabbit in a Snowstorm. Their client is a gentleman who went to a bowling alley and essentially to perform a hit on a guy who was at the bowling alley after hours. And ends up, he brought a gun, but it jammed. He then proceeds to beat the guy with a bowling ball until he dies. He immediately surrenders when the cops show up. He does hide the weapon that he brought to the bowling alley as his intended murder weapon.
His name is John Healy.
John Healy.
Bowling Alley Guy is John Healy. Yeah.
It's Bowling Alley Guy.
Bowling Alley. Actually, I'll continue to call him Bowling Alley Guy, if only to avoid any confusion with, I believe Healy is also a character from The Nice Guys, which is an episode we just did. So, not the last episode that aired, but it was the last episode we recorded. So I'll continue to call him Bowling Alley Guy. But the cops show up. He surrenders to them without a struggle. Immediately asks for an attorney, which is what people should do and what TV never shows them doing. So I was really pleased that he immediately asked for an attorney.
Get him in sight. He's right over here. Don't move. Stay there. Keep your hands up. Dispatch Victor 2-3. We have.
I want a lawyer.
Sorry, I started looking up John Healy in Marvel Comics, and
oh no,
he is a character. It comes from the comic books. He's a supervillain known as Tenpin, who kills people using bowling pins.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
yeah.
I was unaware of that. Well, that makes sense, I guess. Maybe this was his origin story. So he is being held by the police, and when Matt and Foggy show up to be his attorneys. And this is an interesting client interview, where the client, he's using an awful lot of legal jargon. And I think Foggy says that it's clear that this is not his first rodeo.
So what exactly happened, Mr. Healy, in your own words?
All I wanted was to throw a few balls. The lady at the shoe counter will tell you the same.
She also says that you crushed the deceased skull with a bowling ball.
Self-defense. The man and his whatever they were, they threatened my life.
They threatened you how? Verbally, physically?
Which sounds better?
Excuse me?
They threatened me both verbally and physically.
So you say you didn't know or have never met Mr. Prohaska prior to last night?
No, but I do regret any injurious consequences my actions may have caused.
You have quite the legal vocabulary, Mr. Healy. Am I right in assuming this isn't your first rodeo?
I had issues. I'm better now.
And I will say that in my experience, prospective clients who think they are very knowledgeable of the law can be a bit of a red flag, because very often what they know they learned from like Daredevil and Law and Order. So they have kind of they have sort of the cadence of legal language, but they don't know what any of it actually means. Honestly, a lot of sovereign citizen kind of stuff sounds like this. Anyway, they sit down with this guy who's like clearly guilty. He's not answering Foggy's questions. He's when Foggy asks, was he threatening you verbally, physically? His response is, well, what sounds better, which is, better for me. That's not a response you want to hear from a client. No.
You got to respect that client, Geoff. You got to respect the client that goes, what would be better for me to say?
Right. So Foggy, I realize they are brand new, but probably rightly is not too interested in representing this guy. Nevertheless, when Matt arrives late to the meeting, he agrees that they're going to... Matt sort of overrides Foggy and says, we will take on the case.
On second thought, Mr. Healy, perhaps our firm isn't the right fit for you.
Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no, I was just explaining to Mr. Healy that we have a full caseload right now, so...
I'd be happy to represent you, Mr. Healy.
What?
We're taking the case. When we start from the beginning, tell me everything you know.
He says he refuses to waive his 18080 date and declines any hearings or discovery and wants to go straight to trial, which is what happens in the show, but that would not be how that actually plays out in real life. And this, we've discussed, is kind of par for the course, this playing with the timeline. No matter how fast you may want to get to a trial, like the prosecution also has some say. Like, the court is not going to force the prosecution to commence presenting their case like 24 hours after arresting the guy.
Also, they still need to call a jury and do voir dire. And
right. You've got to do voir dire. Even if the defendant doesn't care and is like, don't exercise any peremptory challenges or anything, like, no, you still have to go through that process.
In my experience, scheduling a jury trial is like, well, we can fit you in 6 months from now.
Exactly.
Or you're on a floating calendar, somewhere between 90 and 120 days from now. It's like, God damn it.
Sure. I expect when it's a murder trial and you have somebody in custody, there's a little more
true
urgency, because there are speedy trial rights involved and things like that. I give credit to the show on a lot of what we're about to go through. It's pretty accurate to how New York criminal procedure happens. There is, in fact, New York Criminal Procedure Law, Title H, Section 18080, that requires that defendants be released on their own recognizance within 100, if the prosecution does not within 120 hours dispose of the case or hold some sort of hearing, which seems to me to be beyond simply an arraignment. The arraignment is what starts that clock, that 120 hours. I am not a New York criminal attorney. Derrick, you are a New York attorney, but not a criminal attorney, so I don't want the listener to take what we're saying as any sort of, last word on this. This is my reading of the procedures in the last couple days. But they got that correct, which is interesting. He also says that he won't take the stand, which in an instance where here he is arguing that yes, he killed the guy, but it was self-defense. That he was attacked by the guy's bodyguards and responded with appropriate force. And justification is a defense to this kind of thing. And again, to the show's credit, the Foggy and Matt and Karen are back in the office later, and Foggy is struggling with the internet because he's trying to pull up New York Penal Code 3515, and we do eventually see see it on his screen, and it is the actual statute for self-defense in New York. So I was pleased that they went to that even that minimal extent of like finding the applicable statute, because plenty of shows would not. And I also find it funny that, yeah, without the internet, they're kind of at a loss to do their work. He's just like, there's not time to go to the library. We're apparently having trial tomorrow. I need the practice notes for, the line is, the practice insights for New York Penal Code 3515.
Well, and what is funny is when I started my firm, I literally said like 95% of what I need to start a law firm is a laptop and an internet connection. But you do need the internet connection. That is a very important part of that.
You absolutely need. When I was finishing up law school and thinking, I don't want to go to a big firm. Could I just start my own firm, and what would that take? And yeah, it's like a filing cabinet, a computer, and the internet, and you're basically good to go. And a suit. You'll need a suit. You do need an IOLTA account. That is what you keep client funds in.
Yes. I guess you need the clients first, and then you get
the clients are really a key part of all this.
Yeah,
they are. That's true. You do need the clients too. I was very pleased to see all of that. That is all pretty accurate, especially for a small firm that isn't going to have like, a library of prior motions, briefs, and whatnot to go by. That's all pretty standard. One thing that I want to flag right here, though, is self-defense is something that the prosecution has to disprove beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not on the defendant to prove that it was self-defense. It is on the prosecution to prove that it was not. And that's going to be really key in a little bit. Immediately after, well, not immediately after, we get a few intervening scenes, and then Foggy is delivering the opening statement at the trial. And I realize that timelines are very condensed on TV shows, but this is a little silly. This whole trial happens, like the murder to the conviction. I realize Law and Order does this all the time, but this is all one episode. And based on the conversations that are happening, this all happens within the span of roughly, if I was giving the show a lot of credit, a week. And that simply would not ever happen. You wouldn't even get to voir dire within you wouldn't come close to getting to voir dire within a week. Why am I even hemming and hawing over this? Anyway, Foggy's delivering his opening statement.
And in the state of New York, I'll remind you that my client is not required to prove that he was justified in his actions. Instead, it's up to the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was not justified in defending his life. And they will come nowhere close to meeting this burden. At the end of this case, the only verdict that you can render will be not guilty.
For an opening statement, it's pretty good. There's, trials begin with opening statements and end with closing arguments. And an opening statement is, I kind of liken it to a trailer for a movie. You're laying out what the jury is going to see. Here are the witnesses. Here's what the witnesses are going to testify to. Here's what this trial is about. I had in law school, I had a trial advocacy class where we essentially had a mock trial. And we went through me and my partner were on the defense side, and I was up giving the closing argument at the end of our little mock trial, and one of the people off the street that we were using as jurors told me afterward that it was not until I was giving my closing argument that anyone had told them like what the case was, like what the charge was. Which was a bit of an oversight on everybody's part. You want to let the jury know.
That's not ideal. That's not ideal.
No. You want to let the jury know what the case is about, what they're going to see. What you can't do is present arguments. You cannot say, you're going to hear this and this and this, and therefore and that is not sufficient to meet the applicable standard for whatever. And I think Foggy walks up to the line of making an argument, but in summing up, he basically says they are not going to present sufficient evidence to make their case, which I think ultimately is fine for the end. That's a fine conclusion for a closing or for an opening statement when it comes down to it. I feel like it's getting close to making an argument. I've actually never had to deliver an opening statement or a closing argument in an actual trial outside of my trial advocacy class. It's one of those weird things of the legal practice that everyone thinks of it as the trials.
It's even less than that for civil. Like I swear,
most things
like 2% of litigation or criminal.
I think the most recent stats are it's less than 1%.
It's like 2% for criminal work. I'm not sure what trial.
It's going to vary depending on your practice area, but
even less. Okay,
expect most things to settle ahead.
I figured it was comparable, but I've not looked up.
If they don't settle before the trial day, they are settling moments before you sit in front of the judge.
I was going to say, I mean, the number, there's also some really interesting statistics about the number of cases that settle, like, literally on the courthouse steps as you're walking up. Right. Because there's just certain people that
fire under everyone's ass.
Yep. Well, and sometimes it's even the fact that, I'm sure there's definitely touchstones in each parts of each cases, right? There's points where it would make sense to settle. If you have gotten through the case, you've done all your discovery, you've done summary judgment motions, and they've been denied or whatever, and you are now careening towards trial. What's interesting is there's a window, depending upon what jurisdiction you're in, where nothing happens for a specific period of time. No one's prepping, you're just waiting for a trial date. In certain jurisdictions, that's a couple months. In New York, Manhattan, for instance, it's years. Like they are on a 2 to 3 year window until you get in front of a... So there's just time where nothing happens. No one's going to settle. They've already put the money in, and now nothing's happening. Then, all of a sudden, you have to do trial prep again, and they start getting, I don't know, like estimates of how much it's going to cost you to go through trial. It's interesting how around then some settlements happen, because everyone's like, wait a second, now I got to start writing checks again. And then, otherwise,
it was fine saying we needed an expert witness when it was like, this will be our expert witness. We won't actually have to like pay to fly them in, or for their hourly rate or whatever it is for their testimony.
Right. But then when that all comes to roost, then you start settling, which is why the eve of trial is always the sort of language you use. There's a lot of settlements on the eve of trial because no one wants to pay for all that time and energy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And this is where we do not see any of the actual trial. No witnesses are called, no testimonies delivered. We do know that the available witness, the like girl working the counter at the bowling alley when bowling alley dude showed up was in the bathroom when the altercation started. So she can't testify as to whether he was attacked first or was the one attacking. The bodyguards of the guy he killed lawyered up and aren't cooperating with the investigation. So they aren't testifying as to who started the altercation. And it's on the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he started it. And they have, it seems, zero evidence of who started this fight.
Also,
which is what
one point worth noting is he had a gun on with him at the start of the fight. He hid the gun because I guess it wouldn't fire, right? And then he hid the gun,
jammed up, yeah.
And Wesley retrieves it. If they had evidence that the guy was arrested with a gun on him, maybe that would be like,
that would have
you came in looking for a fight.
That would have been a very strong indicator, yes. So we're going to get in a minute. I guess I'll just address it now. This ends with the jury being hung, meaning they could not reach a decision as to whether he's guilty or not guilty.
They're hung.
Madam Foreperson, it's my understanding from this note that you have been unable to reach a verdict.
We have not, Your Honor.
Al in charge. She's sending him back in. Still split. DA will retry.
No, they won't. Will they, Mr. Healy?
That was a hell of a speech you gave, Murdoch. It's a hell of a speech.
The trial has been expensive for time, effort, money, and emotional strain to both the defense and the prosecution. If you should fail...
There is no way that this gets to the point. If a jury were sent back to deliberate on this, they would come back not guilty. They have no evidence indicating that he started the fight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the jury would even get a chance to deliberate, because if I was Matt Murdock or Foggy here, I would say, I would move for a directed verdict. The prosecution has demonstrated nothing to show that he started the fight. That is absolutely necessary for them to do. This shouldn't go to a jury at all.
The only question I have about that is the fact that he completely obliterated the dude enough to indicate it can't be in self-defense.
They do that a couple times in the show. There's a couple faces that are crushed in.
Like it's one thing to have punched him a few times. I'm not sure if self-defense is where you can literally, I can't imagine what that body looked like afterwards.
That
sure.
might be the one thing they can lean on is like, hey, he did hit him in the face with a bowling ball a couple times. They might show that picture. Like, this is what he looked like afterwards. That might get some votes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine you could have like an Emmy describe what, I don't know, a 15-pound bowling ball would do with one hit versus
7
or 8.
Yeah. I mean,
you guys are counting?
Yeah, it was enough.
I know.
I guess that is a good point, and I could see a sort of battle of, I guess see a battle of the expert witnesses, but even then, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt.
Of course. Yeah,
and
since the trial apparently may have lasted a day, which is unclear.
Right, and also, so the hung jury is governed by Title J, Section 310.60, that says that only after a jury has deliberated for, quote, an extensive period of time, end quote, may a judge consider the jury hung and declare a mistrial. Now, in a very simple trial where it's like, I don't know, it was held over, there's a New York case where the trial was held over an afternoon. The jury has been deliberating over it for 4 hours. And the judge is like, come on, no, this is too much time for us to waste on some piddly, I don't know, property line dispute or who knows. Then that's sufficient under those circumstances to call it an extensive period of time. But when it's a murder trial, it's going to be, even if it was a day of trial where they called the Emmy and that was the only witness, the judge is going to have them go back if it's been like, if it's been a week. Okay, all right, you're hung, fine. And before the judge does that, they'll give and the show does say this, that the judge will give an Allen charge, which is essentially not the judge berating the jury, but the judge strongly encouraging the jury to come to an agreement. There's some interesting discussion of like how much the judge can't like put coercive pressure on the jury to agree. They can't. They don't want to encourage like people cave into peer pressure just because. Nonetheless, the court has to first say, like, hey, sorry, I know you haven't reached a verdict and you don't want to be here, but this is a trial for murder. And you hear the judge, it's very low in the background, and I won't drop a clip because there's too much, like, it is just in the background. The judge is saying to them, like, look, this is a murder prosecution. This is, I understand it's time consuming, but you have an obligation. So I was on the one hand, very pleased to see them having an Allen charge even being read. On the other hand, how this became a hung jury is completely lost on me. Like, it would, if Nelson and Murdoch were worth anything, it would not have gone to a jury, period. Let alone the fact that they've apparently bought two of the jurors, which in New York is a misdemeanor.
Which may show that they did such a horrible job that the only people they got were the two bought.
Right. Exactly. Come on, guys.
Well, I will say that their openings and closings were completely reasonable, right? So, like, maybe they're just the worst, direct testimony, cross-examining attorneys that's ever existed.
Probably really
maybe
gruesome is all I can think of. It's like the picture of the guy's face they really leaned into that.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, forgive me if I seem distracted. I've been preoccupied of late with questions of morality, of right and wrong, good and evil. Sometimes the delineation between the two is a sharp line. Sometimes it's a blur. And often it's like pornography. You just know when you see it. A man is dead. I don't mean to make light of that, but these questions are vital ones. Because they tether us to each other, to humanity. Not everyone feels this way. Not everyone sees the sharp line, only the blur. A man is dead. A man is dead. And my client, John Healy, took his life. This is not in dispute. It is a matter of record, of fact. And facts have no moral judgment. They merely state what is, not what we think of them, not what we feel. They just are. What was in my client's heart when he took Mr. Prohaska's life, whether he is a good man or something else entirely, is irrelevant. These questions of good and evil, as important as they are, have no place in a court of law. Only the facts matter.
It is good in a closing argument to acknowledge that your client is not necessarily squeaky clean, and that just because someone may have a past or who knows what doesn't mean that they're guilty of this crime. The prosecution has to prove as to this crime. But framing it as like, sure, my client might be evil, but you should look past that is a really questionable way of framing that argument.
I might actually be representing
Is my
Hitler.
client a perfect man? Sorry, Mike.
Sorry, I might actually be representing Hitler. But even still.
But he didn't do this one thing. Well, actually,
look past that my guy is evil.
Wait,
look past his tiny little mustache and
to clarify, he did do something, but it was in self-defense, so we are okay. To clarify,
right? And he's like, look, my client killed this guy. No one's disputing that. The only question is, I agree with the intent and the strategy. I think the wording is a bit self-defeating.
But by the way, that sounds exactly what a brand new lawyer would say when they were again.
That's fair.
This goes back to the fact that like we have to remember they are brand new baby lawyers who it sounded great, but also you're like that's not you don't call your own client evil. You may acknowledge certain things about their past, but then you just immediately segue to like that has nothing to do with what we're doing today. You don't call him evil.
Right. Yeah. I could go into like jury tampering. They do engage in some they pretty obviously engage in some jury tampering. Not Foggy and Matt, but the Confed Global folks.
It's the same plot line from Lincoln Lawyer.
Yeah, pretty much. And one juror is dismissed and replaced with an alternate, which is totally normal.
The court grants the motion to excuse juror number 8 from service due to extenuating personal circumstances. The first alternate juror will replace her. Would the defense care to make a closing argument?
The judge does say that she's going to grant the motion to excuse the juror. And under New York criminal procedure, it's not a motion. If a juror has something that precludes them from like continuing to be like a death in the family or something like that, they raise it with the judge, and the judge will
I don't
do a little fact finding and then say, okay, you're free to go. Alternate, step up.
Yeah, I wouldn't think a juror is filing a motion with the court. I don't think that's how that works.
No, that's not how that works. But I mean, I'm getting kind of nitpicky now. The fact that all of this is like largely in keeping with the actual law in New York is a welcome surprise, a welcome change from some of the other TV shows that we have reviewed here. So I was pleasantly surprised by this. Aside from the fact that there's like no competent attorney would let this actually go to deliberation, because it shouldn't.
So jumping in for my part, jumping for my part, there's some landlord-tenant issues and some real estate issues that are occurring throughout the show and take center stage in sort of the latter third of the show. We're introduced to Miss Cardenas. She's this kind, elderly tenant in Daredevil season 1. She's this kind, elderly tenant who becomes a symbol of sort of the rot that's happening in the show. She lives in a rent-controlled apartment in Hell's Kitchen. She's refusing to leave despite pressure from her landlord / thugs. Her apartment's vandalized. Her neighbors' apartments are vandalized. And eventually Fisk hires somebody to kill her.
Bess Mahoney, Brett's mom?
Sí, she referred me. Dice que le da puros.
Something about cigars?
You know Spanish?
Oh, just what I remember from high school.
Mrs. Cardenas, tell us what happened.
Mi casa es rent control. But the landlord, Señor Tully.
Armand Tully? Sleazebag owns buildings all over town.
Sí, y Señor Tully quiere convertir el edificio en condominios de lujo y quiere echarlos.
He wants to convert the apartments to condominiums, and he wants them out.
Hombreros llegaron semanas atrás, haciéndose pasar por obreros.
Men came weeks ago. They said that they were workers.
Demolieron nuestros pisos con mazos.
And they destroyed the apartments with I don't know that last one.
Sledgehammers.
There is damage en todas partes.
Everywhere.
Los fregaderos y los tubos ya no trabajan.
There's no working sinks
No
or
tenemos
pipes.
agua ni
They don't have
electricidad
water
durante
or electricity
días.
for days.
We call policía. We speak to the officer. Pero ellos no ayudan.
The police couldn't help.
Policía say it is a city issue. No sabemos qué hacer.
They don't know what to do.
Well, this says Tully offered them $10,000 to give up their rent control and vacate the premises. Maybe we can pressure him into giving a better payout?
No, Señor Foggy, We do not want money. We want to stay in our homes.
And these apartments are like unlivable, right?
Yeah, they've intentionally got it. They've intentionally forced it to the point that it's unlivable. Actually, that raises another question.
Like she basically doesn't have running water at one point, right?
Yes. That's actually
Sorry,
something I had not thought about. All right, so
I didn't mean to give you
no.
another
I
thing to
had a
quickly look
whole.
up.
All right, so the background of this, and it's kind of a little bit of the time place that it takes place in. So this was filmed in, I think, 2014. And if you guys look at the Google Doc and you scroll all the way down, that chart is Google Trends for gentrification, and the big peak when gentrification was peaking was 2014. It was the most
interesting.
It was really in the zeitgeist then. Gentrification was really, really evil. So of course, little old ladies getting forced out. The landlord wants to renovate these, wants to tear down the rent-controlled apartment, make them condominiums, and sell them for $1 billion. The way that they're doing that is, they're harassing her. They're making the apartment unlivable. It's constructive eviction. It's an illegal eviction. The penalties for an illegal eviction in New York are pretty fucking severe. New York City criminalizes unlawful evictions, prohibits landlords from using self-help to remove the tenant. If you want to evict somebody, you have to go through a whole process in any jurisdiction, and the court will grant you the right to do that, and you schedule it with the constable or the sheriff or whatever the local office that handles that. And you as an individual are not changing the lock. The city, there's no jurisdiction that wants you going to the door changing the locks on somebody. A, because how do they know you legally can do that? And B, like, they don't want to have individual citizens doing that. It's much better when it is the constable's office doing that, because like the one source, the state has the monopoly on legitimate use of force.
Sure,
they're the ones that can do that. But the penalties can be thousands of dollars. They can be a year in jail. All of these things kind of add up. And the reason I'm going into this is like there's legal ways that they could have done this, and however much Derrick and Geoff are going on how like they got most of the law right, the show kind of completely blows past that. Like there are actual legal ways to do this, to like end rent control in New York City. It's famously difficult, but like the show also continuously shows us Wilson Fisk being all powerful and having complete control over all of these different elements. So like, why wouldn't he just bribe the board that would handle this? The way I was thinking he should handle this was for a demolition application, and it's a way to end rent controls to. Where did I have their sheet up? But I have too many tabs open.
I would say there's got to be an easier way than what he did. There's got to be.
To demolish a building with rent stabilized apartments. So in New York, there's rent control and rent stabilized. This would apply to both of them, but you would apply with the Division of Housing and Community Renewal, DHCR, and you have to show that like there's a legitimate reason to tear down the building. There's some compensation provided to the tenants. It's a whole big long process that would probably take years, but also totally worth it to avoid going to jail. Like probably saves you a bunch of money on having to bribe people. Probably much easier to like just go through the normal process on this. Geoff made the comment about it being unlivable, and that is a violation of the warrant of habitability, but also I wonder if the building were just genuinely in bad shape to the point that it had to be condemned, if they could get them out, and I have not done any digging on that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's actually an interesting. So it's an interesting point, because I do know that, and there's definitely some litigation on this. So if you do find it out, Mike, we could always do a separate sidebar on it. But there are definitely cases where landlords tried to make it so bad that it got condemned.
Yeah, so I probably am skipping over this a little bit too much. Where for something to be an illegal lockout, it doesn't have to be you changing the locks. It could just be you making it unlivable. I've heard of cases where like a landlord poured cement down the sink. So it's like, oh yeah, now you just don't have running water. Congratulations.
Right.
That's an illegal lockout. It's also a breach of the warrant of habitability. A landlord has an obligation to make sure that the property is livable and safe. Now, sometimes things are out of their control. Lightning strikes the building, there's an earthquake or something, and suddenly it's no longer livable. It's not the landlord's fault. And it's funny. This goes into both some of my work areas, but also like one of my strongest political beliefs is that we need to build more housing. And it's also weirdly the most controversial thing that against like arguments at the bar where people are upset about the idea of us building more housing because everyone thinks that the construction companies are evil or that the developers are evil. And it's like, I want more housing because I want more people to be able to afford to live in a place.
Well, again, if there's more options, then everything gets cheaper theoretically in the grand scheme of things, right?
It's like the most basic economic thing is like supply and demand. If there's a bigger supply of housing,
right,
it would drive down the price.
Right.
I think that the show came out at just the right moment for people to be really anti-gentrification, and gentrification is like a certain subplot of the show where like we just want old-timey boxers to live here and little Hispanic ladies, and like if you've lived here before, you never have to move.
Right. Was this roughly the time of The Rent Is Too Damn High?
2014, that sounds right, yeah.
I love that guy. That guy was fun. What was his name?
Wasn't it Vermin, whatever? Or am I getting him mixed up with somebody else?
Jimmy McMillan is who I'm thinking of. Jimmy McMillan, he's a perennial mayoral candidate, and that is his saying, is the rent is too damn high.
Oh, he's been around for a while.
Yep. All right, so looking at the Google Trends for that spiked in 2010.
Yep.
So shortly before this.
Right.
I like this show. Sorry, I guess the conclusion of mine is like there were probably easier legal avenues for them to go through, and that's my biggest objection to it. For the most part, they're right about the law. Like, what they're doing is horrible and criminal, and if they actually went to trial with this, they would clearly win. And that's just like the real estate aspect of it. Not to mention like, they're also guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and I think there was a fire and like all kind like a million other crimes that would have sent you to jail for decades. In addition to like the $1,000 fine for the illegal lockout.
I'm curious now, and I apologize for not mentioning this to either of you earlier. I wonder if Nelson and Murdoch has been retained by Confederated Global.
Oh, conflict.
But they don't know that there's a conflict.
Yeah. And it's a big enough organization that we don't even know if it's a real corporation. It's just some people behind the scenes. So if you're retained by an unnamed person to represent, I guess you just represent, because you're retained by Confederated Global, there is some unknown employer. Confederated Global, were they involved in the real estate aspect also?
The show doesn't really go into it. They just, it is one of Fisk's properties, but it's unclear if he's like,
we don't have
if he controls it informally or,
Well, and this is one of those interesting situations where, as a lawyer, you ask for all the parties at issue to make sure you can run conflicts.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like, I can tell a story where this happened, where I had a scenario where one of my clients threatened to sue another one of my clients.
Oh.
And it was because one of my clients had bought a sub at some point. They didn't even really operate it. It was just under their
sandwich.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeffrey. one of my clients
bought a panini.
One of my clients bought a $7 foot long, whatever the fuck it is. No, one of my clients bought basically had a subsidiary that I wasn't aware of, and they sent a demand letter to my other client, and it was funny enough because it was like the reason I just represented both parties was because one of the C-suite guys had left to go to a different one, so he brought me over to the new client.
Okay.
But I wasn't aware of the sort of subsidiary, so all of a sudden, so he knew I was conflicted out. He had kept me out of it, knowing that there was a conflict, but he didn't tell the other people in the company. So one day I get an email that's like, "Hey, did this get brought to your attention?" And I'm like, "No." And he sends me the demand letter. And my brain exploded because at the top of the demand letter was my other client's name.
Yeah. in that situation, you either have to recuse yourself or get someone to sign a conflict waiver or something. Or
I separated myself from both sides. I immediately said, I can't represent you in this. I called up the other side and I said, I can't represent you in this. Funny enough, I ended up being the mediator in negotiating a settlement on behalf of both sides. But they both agreed, like, I couldn't give either of them advice. I just did the business. I just sort of talked them through it.
This is the time where you hopefully have a bunch of like other firms that you're good friends with, and you send them both like, you do this case, then you do that case.
Well, let's be honest. There wasn't enough money at issue for that to be worthwhile. If there was more money at issue, that would have happened. But there wasn't enough money, and we ended up getting through it pretty quickly. But that sort of goes to sort of what Geoff's situation is, which is sometimes you don't know every party because you just can't. Like, if I represent certain parties and I ask them for all the parties at issue, technically they'd have to send me every subsidiary, every whatever. Like, you can't get to everything.
Every employee of Confederated Global, which sounds like this.
Right. Like you can't done it. Like, a conflict check can't run every single possible human or every single possible thing.
I was trying to think of a name for an LLC that I was going to make. Confederated Global might be it.
Check if it's trademarked.
But yeah, like it's probably a conflict, but they don't know it. Nor could they know it.
Right. Yeah, they're in a position where they...
Interesting question. Wish we had thought about that ahead of time. But yeah, there probably would be. At the same time, how would it have arisen that it would be an issue? Like,
well, I suppose they would have had to let... Because Foggy goes and talks with his ex at their old firm.
Oh, there are conflicts there.
Convincing my client to agree to your terms... That's your job, and I'm not going to do it for you. So you think there are only two options. These tenants take the payout and leave, or leave without taking it. But given how long they've put up with Tully's bullshit, I think you're actually afraid that Mrs. Cardenas and her neighbors will find a way to eke by. And short of physically and very illegally forcing tenants from their rent-controlled homes, Armand Tully loses his condos. Your firm loses Tully, and that's very bad for business. You want me and my client to think that you're doing us a favor, that we have no leverage, when really, we have all of it. So you're gonna see us in court, where I will absolutely dismantle you from the top of your salon blowout to the bottom of your overpriced pumps.
You would have killed it here, Foggy Bear. You never should have left.
You never should have signed on, Mars. You were really something back in the day. When you had a soul.
Foggy Bear?
We used to date.
You dated that?
Yep, let's step a little faster.
Well, but they were interns at that firm?
Yeah.
Right.
So...
They were never attorneys there.
Yeah, but later she's giving him... Sorry, for
well,
the
that's
rest
not
of the plot, later she's like giving him all the attorney-client information about Wilson Fisk.
Well, that's not a conflict. That's just unethical. But here we are.
Well, it's both.
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah. And yeah. So I guess going back to the show itself, I enjoy the show. It's this weird era where like it doesn't seem like it's that long ago, but 2015 was 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah, and it is such a different era where like Marvel's at a different point. Like even fashion's a little bit different. You're watching them and they're wearing like really skinny fit suits and stuff. There's like little things that I'm like, this is 10 years ago. Yeah. I enjoy it. It is this weird era where like every Netflix show in that time period felt like it was 2 episodes too long, and I was like it was a good show. They could have had this instead of 13 episodes. They could have had this at 10 or 11.
I will say, like, from like, let's say. There are some very important things that happen between 5 and 9, but they didn't need to be 5 episodes. Like it could, like I feel like
sure.
The nenext season, there's like 1 or 2 episodes that I genuinely like. There's no fucking reason for this episode to exist. What the fuck?
It's always funny, like because like I think of like Ted Lasso, for instance, where they actually got 2 more episodes than they thought they were going to have, so they actually had to write 2 completely independent episodes regardless of the plot that they threw in. So one's like a Christmas episode and one is an episode specific about Beard, who's the assistant coach. They don't need to be in there. They add
the episode where Beard is like wandering around the city?
Yes.
Best episode of the show.
So Beard's Night Out is actually one of my favorite episodes, but it was a sort of last minute thing, and it does not change the plot because it's sort of self-contained one night, but it can be
but they can be awesome. Long list of thoughts on that episode I'll talk to you about later.
Right. Oh, I'm sure, and everyone does, because some people hate it, some people love it. But
no, it's the best episode.
I love the episode, but that sort of goes to this situation of like, sometimes an extra episode that doesn't need to be in there is amazing in of itself, and then sometimes you're like, well, that was a waste of 45 minutes. Why did I just watch that? Sure. And it really depends upon the writing and how well they do it. I assume with Daredevil, the goal was to have every single one make sense and like be part of the plot.
It's supposed to be a 13-hour movie or a 12-hour movie. Yeah. And for the most part, it succeeds. There's just one or two bits that like, and for the most part, I like a show that lets people breathe. There's just like one or two episodes where I'm like, this is kind of a mindless fight, or this is sort of a whatever. Right. Things that I love about the show is like the action scenes are like the best you'll ever see in a TV show. Like very few shows have like fight scenes on par with that hallway fight scene at the beginning.
I would say the hallway fight scene is you actually told me about that fight scene a while ago, and then I watched it. I'm like, yeah, I get that. That's awesome.
It's also funny watching it now, and like I'm paying attention to like, oh, it's funny that all these faceless goons, you literally never see their face. And it's like, oh yeah, they probably have to reuse these stunt actors a lot. They're very careful. It's like when you go on the ground, you face away from the camera.
They do. There's a YouTube channel. Jill Barrett does fight choreography analysis, and she has done reactions to the season 1 hallway fight and a season 2 fight that's kind of a piece with the hallway fight, and there are several shared stunt guys that get like that you see quite clearly.
There's only so many people who like it's a specific skill set that like you can hit a mark, you can do everything they need you to do, and also you can do crazy backflips.
Right,
crazy backflips. And do these things like
you can take a punch appropriately, which is actually very hard to do.
Yep.
Like or always show to make it seem like you got punched appropriately without it being over the top or the opposite. Yeah, yeah.
I have a bunch of notes on the show. We're just running through everything we have. Vincent D'Onofrio's speech at the end about what's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Just a great speech right there for like a show that occasionally like struggled with dialogue. That was like amazing. Sure. I hate most of the flashbacks. They are weird racial stereotypes 90% of the time, where it's like, oh, I'm Irish and I like to box.
Yeah, and I don't really think they help the show for the most part.
No, they don't.
Honest.
I think the flashbacks to Fisk's childhood I find interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. I was watching part of this with my girlfriend, and have you guys seen the Penguin show? Came out last year.
The first 3 episodes.
You did not enjoy it?
No, I need to go back and finish watching it.
I thought that was like the best show that came out last year, and it's like, oh, the Penguin was a better version of this, like better version of Gangland, organized crime, but also comic booky. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got. Okay, should we give it the reviews?
Yep.
Yeah, go for it. So. It's your episode. Do you want to start things off, or
I'm gonna affirm on the law. I think for the most part it got it right. The one area that it was lacking was some of the real estate things, but even that, like, it's not like it got it wrong at trial. It's just that there was an actual legal path the characters could have taken that they chose not to. So I'm gonna affirm on that aspect. I'm gonna affirm on the quality. I thought it was like maybe not a perfect show, but I enjoy it, and I occasionally go back and rewatch.
All right, I'll jump in. I'll affirm on both as well. I mean, as we discussed, like, I think it gets most of the law right, and sometimes it doesn't get the law right. It could easily be because we have brand new baby lawyers who could be getting it wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it is completely fair that he would screw up a closing and call his client evil. It'd be completely fair if they walk into to a new client and be like, we're your lawyers, and you've just told them you're your lawyers, even though that's not true. Like, all that stuff is completely feasible. It's very entertaining. It's not actually like my shtick. Like, this isn't like a show that I would have actively pursued on my own. And yet I have already made myself halfway through season 2. So you got me. Okay. You got me.
Yeah,
I hate to
there we
say
are.
it, but this isn't like how you get away with murder, where I did not go any further whatsoever.
Didn't watch the next episode of that now.
In fact, what I can tell you about how we can delete this if we need to, but my wife watched a good chunk of that entire season because she thought we were talking about the whole season, not just episode 1.
Oh, that's
and
funny.
she's like, oh my god, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Which is funny based on how many awards it got. But anyway, I have descended into complete nonsense. So don't have to worry about that. Short version is this is awesome. I'm still watching it, so affirm on both.
Okay,
and
awesome.
Not even a question.
I will, for enjoyment, I will give this season my affirmance. I think I'm on the fence on season 2, and I would not be for enjoyment. I was not a fan of season 3, but that's a conversation for another day. Season 1, thumbs up, yes, affirmed on entertainment. And I will say, despite the fact that yes, I can't see them ever the bowling alley guy's trial never getting to jury deliberation. I was impressed by the fact that they had clearly done like the legal research. They had done at least as much as I did to prepare for the show, which is more than most of what we watch.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I have to affirm for that as well. Is it perfect? No. Obviously, we talked about in all of these, the time is crazy condensed. But would I have taken on that guy as a client? No, but they are needing clients.
Yeah.
And they've, I guess, already been paid for the service.
Right.
So,
well, and let's be honest, like, it's not complete, like, especially on the criminal side, everyone's entitled to a defense. So, like,
it's true. Yeah.
It's also the only time all season they get paid.
True.
It's one episode. It's like 30.
Oh yeah, we don't know how much. It was apparently a sufficient number of zeros to impress Foggy.
But for Foggy, that could have been $1,000.
I don't know. He interned at a big law firm. I imagine they have.
So
some,
we presume it's 100. I would presume it's 100,000 if I had to guess.
That was actually that was in line with what I was thinking, because
I don't know.
You're being retained
because
on this very open-ended situation. You don't know what it's going to entail.
Right.
$10,000 would not be enough.
No.
It depends on what I don't think they knew they were signing up for a murder trial at first, right?
Yeah,
no.
They didn't. No.
Like I have retainers with my clients that are like $5,000 rolling, and like I'm perfectly happy with that. It just means that after every couple of months they send me $5 more grand.
Right.
Yeah,
and I have those
but
too.
I doubt
but
they are.
I wouldn't
Confederated Global.
No,
massive,
they don't have names that big.
Investment.
No.
Right, and
corporation.
And when I do get the $5,000 retainer, I don't go, ooh, that's a lot of zeros.
No, you're just like, okay,
right.
Yeah, as long as the money's coming in, I don't really fucking care. But
right, fair enough. No, this is overall good. I'm actually happy with some of you guys. Some of the suggestions you've made, I haven't been happy to watch the film. This one I've been happy. This one's I've been happy. So
I will figure out what the scheduling is going to be, but at some point I would like to do season 2.
And we will probably do season 2. We will probably do I almost said reboot, but the resurrection. What's it?
It's literally called Born Again.
Season. Born Again.
Born Again. Yes.
Which I have watched 5 minutes of and then put away.
Ooh.
Actually, because the hallway fight scene is so good, and then the fight at the beginning of episode 1 of the new series is like CGI'd crazy. And I was very discouraged by that. I'm told there's a very good fight down the road, but
it became such a signature of the show to have these great long, if you read the production details, they made a point of well, we could do this in multiple takes, but let's see if we can really do it in one take. Mm-hmm. And it took them 8 attempts to get that fight scene right.
Crazy.
All right.
That's
everything. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank everybody. Thank you all.
The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by Morwa PLLC.
The opinions expressed in the Not So Grand Jury are those of the hosts themselves and not of their respective employers.
The theme music for the Not So Grand Jury is from Gustav Holst's Jupiter and is in the public domain.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you want to suggest future movies, or even if you want to offer corrections, you can email us at notsograndjury@gmail.com or message us on any of our social media accounts.
The Not So Grand Jury is copyright 2025, all rights reserved.